Today we're looking at family and home. It's the little tableau from the cross. And I've selected for a passage of Scripture to talk about family and home, the most reviled passage in all of the Pauline literature. It's from the 5th chapter of Ephesians, so would you listen to see if the Spirit of God might bring a word to us in the midst of this. Be subject to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, be subject to your husbands as you are to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, just as Christ is the head of the church, the body of which he is the Savior. Just as the church is subject to Christ, so also wives ought to be in everything to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, in order to make her holy by cleansing her with the washing of water by the word, so as to present the church to himself in splendor, without a spot or a wrinkle or anything of the kind. Yes, so that she may be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as they do their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself, for no one ever hates his own body, but he nourishes and tenderly cares for it, just as Christ does for the church, because we are members of his body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a great mystery. I'm applying it to Christ and the church. Each of you, however, should love his wife as himself, and a wife should respect her husband. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and your mother. This is the first commandment that has a promise attached, so that it may be well with you and you may live long on this earth. And fathers, don't provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling, in singleness of heart, as you obey Christ, not only while being watched and in order to please them, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. Render service with enthusiasm, as to the Lord and not to men and women, knowing that whatever good we do, we will receive the same again from the Lord, whether we are slaves or whether we are free. And masters, do the same to them. Stop threatening them, for you know that both of you have the same master in heaven. And with that master there is no partiality. Hear what the Spirit is saying to our church. So I'd just like to start by having a stand-in for the Apostle Paul. Okay, we're going to have a stand in a little movie, and so that we can work out all those feelings of discomfort we had in that passage. There you go. Okay, have we worked all our feelings about the Apostle Paul out? That was the idea, just to get it out of our system. Okay, because you never can tell, there might be something to say about this. I mean, you know, the Apostle Paul wrote at a time when things were just seemingly, from our point of view, unjust, right? That's why we don't like it. Women are living in a role in that society where they're unable to come to their full selves. They're unable to become individuals that are realized and been able to thrive. You know, slaves, good heavens, Paul seems to be accepting slavery in that passage. And so we object to it. The interesting thing is that I'm not sure any of the women in that society gave it a second thought. You see, those societies were agricultural societies, much different than where we're living. I mean, think about it. In an agricultural society, when you have children, they make you money. They do. The children are financial security. You want to have as many of them as you can so that your land can expand and grow so things can become more productive. And now, children cost a ton of money. You know, so you move from this place where the family is a central unit. It's the thing that gives you economic stability. Into a culture now, it's like an earthquake has happened, where the family is not some place where you get your security. In fact, the purpose of marriage has changed as we've gone through this earthquake. It used to be that the reason you got married is so you had economic security. You had an economic partnership. And love, you didn't expect love. But in the 18th century, things began to shift. Now all of a sudden, marriage is supposed to provide you with love and affection. That's what many of Jane Austen's novels were about. My favorite author. You stick around long enough, you're going to know the plot of Pride and Prejudice. Just wait it. You know, Charlotte and Elizabeth, two women in that novel. Charlotte was this very practical woman who decided to marry this absolute idiot because he was a stable provider and a good match for her. Elizabeth, not willing to settle, she wanted love, and she went for it. Now you can tell how Jane Austen feels about this, the purpose of marriage, by what Elizabeth got for standing firm and holding for love. She got the richest guy in the whole book. Okay? Things changed. From a society where children were giving you security to a society where they weren't, and therefore where marriage had to be about love. It's an uncomfortable thing to think of, but we really can't even raise our children anymore, right? We have to send them to teachers so that they can be educated, so that they can become independent individuals. Isn't that what we raise them to be? We want them to be independent, to make wise decisions so that they can become everything that they can become. That's what we do in a modern society. The modern society is focused on individuals being able to express their full potential, and it is why women have needed to leave the home. It used to be that was the central way to bring value into the world. Women had the role that counted, economically and every other way. But now the purpose of family has shifted. We can complain about it and say it shouldn't be that way, but that's evolution for you. It moves forward, and that is what's happened. So now we live in a world where individuals are looking for ways to express themselves and be complete. And so what happens, in order to do that, they move away from the long-standing family homes. They move away from the connections that they have, and they're scattered all over the world. How many of you have children that don't live anywhere near you? I'm 3,000 miles away from my father. That's the nature of things when we seek to become everything that we can become. Now, there's some good things about it. It's been in a time of extraordinary creative ability for humankind, wonderful technological advances. We've learned to cure diseases, we've built incredible things. I mean, some good things have come out of this, but with the good, there are some challenges that we need to deal with. And one thing is the fragmented society that results from this effort of individuals becoming all that they can be. Right? There are a couple of ways we can see it. Marriages don't seem to hold together like they used to. And why? Because they're focused on whether or not we can fill one another's needs for love, or more these days. Now that we have more leisure, we're looking to develop and grow, and it's almost like we have a deep psychic need for connection. And we're looking to our partners to be able to fulfill that. In a society like that, it makes all the sense in the world for gay and lesbian people to get married, because the purpose of marriage is to feel connected at a deep level. But an institution that was intended to provide economic security is now providing all of the connection you could possibly want. And it doesn't hold together that way. And notice a couple of other ways in which the fragmentation shows. We've been talking a lot this week about burials and what to do with ashes. Okay? So a lot of people now, what do? They take the ashes and they spread them somewhere that meant a lot to the person who had died. It's a way to honor their wishes, a way to think of them being with the things or in the things that they had enjoyed while they were alive. Once it's done, it's gone. The individual does not have a place within the larger family in the same way that it used to. I have a very old-fashioned family. That's our family plot in Philadelphia. And my great-grandmother, my great-grandfather are there, my grandmother, my grandfather, my Aunt Louise and Uncle Bob, my mom's there. Debbie, my first wife, is there. And we're relatively lighthearted about this place. It's a sacred place, a fun place for us. I told Barbara the first time we visited, honey, I've got room for 3 more wives. But the other thing about this place, it's a place of connection. That's my cousin Richard. I hadn't seen him for 3, maybe 4 years. And I was going to be in the Philadelphia area, and it was a nice day, and so I called him up and I said, let's meet at the gravesite. He, of course, knew where it was, because we've been visiting it since we've been kids, and we sat for 4 hours. We had the nicest time. That's because it's a place where we feel connected to the whole family, but my goodness, I hadn't seen him for 3 or 4 years. There is this sense of fragmentation. It shows itself in a variety of ways, but maybe the deepest way that it shows it is in the increased level of shame in our culture. Increased level of shame. Now, shame is that feeling you have that you're not worthy of connection. It's that thing that you carry on the inside that you're afraid of, because you're afraid it means you're not worthy to be loved and cared for. And I actually have to be a little careful about talking about shame, because I've found over the years that if I talk about shame too often, people get angry at me. They do. Oh, not in the service. Nobody says anything then. But afterwards, during the week, I get all kinds of anger, and I never quite know why. And this is the 3rd time I've talked about it in 5 weeks, so I'm pushing the edge. But it's something that eats us from the inside out. It's something the gospel can touch. I mean, we feel it so profoundly. I certainly feel it. I feel ashamed. I mean, I've been self-disclosive the last couple of weeks, so I'll do it again today. You know, when I come to a church, I had a deep sense that, you know, we needed to go a particular direction because the facts of life, of the world around us, mean that we can't be the kind of church we've always been. We can't do the kind of things we've always done. And as I began to exert influence and move us in that direction, people got angry at me, and they sort of broke connection with me. And what was interesting about that is I felt ashamed, like there was something wrong with me. You know what shame does? It increases aggression, it increases addiction, and it increases depression. And my guess is some of you felt the opposite. It's like, well, what's wrong with us that he wants to change us? You know, that's how shame operates in our lives, and I wonder if you can think for a moment how it operates in yours and other relationships. How you carry that sense that you're not worthy to be loved and cared for. The Apostle Paul has a lot to say about that. And he said it in Ephesians in a society that was structured much differently than ours. But it seems fairly clear to me that they were struggling with relationships, and it's why Paul needed to write about it. Assuming it was Paul, might have been his disciple. But what he began to notice was that people were looking at one another as tools, things to be used to have their needs fulfilled. And so what ends up happening is that we stop loving the other person. And this is the kind of love that expresses a creative power of God to one another. The kind of love that lifts one another up. Love your wife, he said. Apparently somebody wasn't loving their wife. Wasn't looking for the best possible thing to happen for her. This week I was preparing for the sermon, so it reminded me, oh yeah, I need to love my wife. So I put up the massage table and I left it up. You know? Every night for a few minutes. That's loving another person, to put value in them, to care for them, and not to focus on your own needs, because that's when people feel connected. That's when you feel connected to the other, is when you give. That's what Paul was getting at. Because this is what the power of Christ was about. The creative power of God that moves into our lives and makes us whole. And it's precisely that love of Christ that Paul wants us to express to one another. Because he understands that at the very root, every single one of us is worthy of love, of connection. Every single one of us is worthy to be made whole. It's interesting, in our fragmented society, we talk about enlightenment. You know, this move to the individual to become the most he or she can be. That move is called the Enlightenment, right? You know, to become the individual. But in the East, they also talk about enlightenment, but it's a very different thing. In the East, enlightenment means to realize that there is no separation between us. That we are, in fact, all one, drawn together in a perfect unity, in a fabric that's woven tight. And some people object to putting themselves in that place of unity because they feel as though it would mean they'd lose themselves. And it's valid. But once you live in that place of recognition that everybody around you is united to you, you become a unique expression of that one thing. A unique expression of the fabric of creation, created by the love of God. Each and every one of us has the opportunity to express that love and to lay hold of that love. It's your birthright. Because the power of God to create lives in every one of you. You are worthy. No shame. Shame has its power when it stays in the dark. Sometimes it's important to bring it out into the light, where you can't hurt anyone. What you'll find if you make yourselves vulnerable is people will see you as courageous. Did you see me that way a few minutes ago? It's an opportunity for God to bring healing to you. It's what the power of the gospel is for. So I'm going to forgive Paul putting it in terms that seem unjust 2,000 years later.